Hey, everybody, I'm Scott Harkey, and welcome to Season 4 of Enfuce Payment Talks, where we dive headfirst into understanding how companies are shaping the direction of payments innovation. This season, we're focusing on B2B payments, exploring the unique challenges and opportunities in the space. And today's episode focuses on Enfuce, a leading player in the payments industry known for its innovative solutions in issuing and payment processing. We're delighted to have co-CEO and co-founder Monika Liikamaa with us today. Monika, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Excited about the conversation today. And it's always a good thing to start with making sure people know a little bit more about who you are, what you do in the company. So maybe give us a little bit of background, how you got to where you're at, and what's so great about what you're doing today.
Yes, thank you. Well, I'll start with the most important thing is, of course, I'm Finnish. So I'm from Finland. And as a nation, we are born and raised within the sphere of compliance. So we have a tendency to over-comply to stuff, which is a good thing if you're in the payment industry. And myself, I'm 54 years old or young. I have 4 kids, and I've been a developer in the past millennium and then been building banks and financial institutions now for, probably closer to 25 years. And 8 years ago, I was a bank director running a card payments business, was working with some of the Nordic's biggest issuer processors, and was a bit, how should I say, fed up of everything being horrifically slow, costing shitloads of money, pardon my French, and just being an absolute pain to get out good services to customers, whether they are consumers or corporates. And then I was like, how hard can this be? I've been doing this for a long time. Maybe I'll just do it better, faster, and globally scalable myself. And that's how Enfuce was founded. Then it happened to be that we are actually the first one in the world to put the issuing of money in a public cloud. Because when I said I want to go global, I realized that I need to have an infrastructure that I can scale globally. And I also wanted to have high availability. So really being better and faster. And I didn't have any money. So I was like, how do I make this thing happen? And as such, we started negotiating with Microsoft and with AWS. And then back in those days, it feels like a century ago, which is probably soon it is, we decided on AWS because they were much more advanced at that point in time, especially into services that have the high security requirements as we have in the payments industry. And that's short how Enfuce came about, a little bit of who I am. I like to get shit done. And I really like to help customers, meaning like banks, financial institutions, non-bank, issue payments better, faster, and then scalable. And today we have around 17 million end users using our payments every day.
That's awesome. And it's always good when it works out, right? So you found that not only can you go build something where you can do it faster, but actually making it successful as well, which is no small feat. It's interesting. I was going to ask you, when I was reading about Enfuce, I read the comment or kind of the tagline around kind of being the first mover of money, or I don't remember what the exact wording was, being cloud-based. And I was going to ask you, like, so what, right? Like for the uneducated in the space, why does that matter, or what does that mean? And I think you kind of already answered that. But are there other things you found that by being a newer company in the scheme of, a lot of payments companies have been around for a really long time and have really antiquated technology? What are some of the other advantages you've seen of having a newer technology stack, being cloud-based, presumably using kind of modern development methods? How has that advantaged you in competing and just being successful in the market?
I think speed. It gives me speed, and I don't have to compromise accuracy. So like we have this, again, I used to be an old banker, and I was like, shit, you can't go cloud because nobody done it before and yada, yada. But in the end of the day, going cloud, of course, first of all, I used to have to buy massive data center capacity to make sure that the peak hours, I wouldn't block payments. So of course, going cloud, I can scale infinite, more or less, and I only pay for what I use. So what an awesome thing. And then, of course, I buy from the players that are the best in what they do. So I don't have to pretend anymore that I know how to run data centers, because that's not part of my core business, even though it's fundamental to my core business.
Right.
But then, of course, the mindset. I think all in all, the biggest problems banks and incumbents have is a cultural mindset. So even though the people change and younger generation comes in, somehow it is built into the walls that everything has to somehow be very hard, because otherwise it's not secure. And that's not just how the world works today.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I've never heard that before, but can definitely resonate. Can definitely see it in other things that we work on as well. One of the other things I want to do was kind of to kick things off was I saw that you recently won 2 awards at the European FinTech Awards, FinTech of the Year, which is pretty amazing. I'll ask you about that in a second, but also the best ESG campaign. And I know that's a big part of your personal kind of message and goals, as well as for the company. Maybe tell me a little bit more about that and what it means to you and why that's such a focus for what you're doing.
To put it short, I wanted to build a company that I can be proud of, that my children can be proud of, as I have 4 of them, and also the company I never worked at. So, like, as I said, I was 40 plus, bored out of my mind, and also very conscious about the challenges in the world, and decided that we need to do something about it. And then you start to getting labeled a lot of stuff, which is funny. So, because then we realized that me and my co-founder Denise, we are both women, and unfortunately, that's not something you see a lot. And I do believe that the world becomes better for diversity and in inclusion. So then we started really being advocative of how do we get more people, and especially girls, into tech, as we do want the world to become a fairer place. And as far as I know, no woman ever started a war. Probably someone can prove me wrong, but I would say that it's a very small part, and domestic wars don't.
Lots of
count.
fighting over women, but maybe not a woman actually.
Yeah, exactly. So that's where we started, and then ESG as a wording abbreviation became a little bit of a, something cool. And for us, it has never been about us. For us, like, we've always focused on environment. So we already, when we started, we really also saw that when we choose AWS and we really together with them focus on how do we architect for scale, how do we build it for security, and then environmental aspects. So we really demand and make sure that all our loads are run in data centers that are really focused on recycling, water, etc. And then, of course, came the governance aspect that has started off where Finns, we're very compliance driven. I'm like, if you come to Finland, Helsinki, you see no person, but it is the red light in the crossing the street, we won't cross the street. We'll wait until it's green. That is somehow, it is a good thing, and sometimes it can be a challenging thing, but in the end of the day, we take it very serious. So governance is very important. And then, of course, social aspects. And for us, especially, as I always like to level up on stuff, this year we are really, really leveling up on SDG 16, which is like peace, justice, and fair governance. And because we, for example, are also an issuer and an issuer processor for relief funds. For example, the Finnish State Treasury disperses a lot of relief funds for different use cases. And always when you have relief funds for refugees or other people in distress, there's also a lot of bad stuff, meaning people who try to take advantage of it. So we're really focusing on nailing so that we can fight fraud, human trafficking, terrorist financing, money laundering, massive issues in the world and also in Europe. I mean, like, for God's sake, we have a war going on in Europe, which is such a horrible thing, and of course in globally. So to kind of summarize it, we want to lead by example, because both me and Denise, we have both daughters and sons. So I have 2 daughters and 2 sons, and she has a son and a daughter. And in order to really have a reason to wake every morning, because being an entrepreneur, it's not a dance on roses, it's a lifestyle. You need to have purpose in life. And purpose also attracts good people. So in the end of the day, as I live in a religion where I believe we only live once, let's make it count.
I appreciate you sharing that perspective. And I know it's not the area we normally go down in these conversations, but I think as I was researching the company and researching you and the things that you did, I felt like it was an important part of your story and the story of the company. So appreciate you highlighting some of that. If I steer us back towards some of the kind of more core B2B payment questions and explore that space a little bit, I think the starting point is probably around talking about payment methods in general. And a lot of what we talk about at Endava and what we see happening in the market is often around some of the real-time rails or around, the account-to-account schemes, non-card products, basically. But clearly there's a massive amount of volume in cards, and we continue to see it grow in the B2B area as well. How do you view the role of cards specifically in B2B? And is it new use cases that are emerging? Is it about advancements of the existing use cases and then making easier to use virtual cards and other things? How do you see the space evolving as it relates to some of these other payment methods, which get a lot of attention right now?
Yeah, I think, again, being from Finland, and we were the first in the world to have internet bank in the 90s, there's a lot of things that seem cool and hype now, which probably is for parts of the world and then not for others. Account to account or bank transfers or whatever you want to call them, of course, they've been there more or less forever. So it is about how fast can you clear and settle funds. And now with the upcoming account to account transactions and SEPA direct debits, etc., the actual settlement and clearing of money has become very fast, which is good in many use cases, and of course increases fraud risk in other use cases. And then it's like, no, but it's not, because it's so secure, because you need to identify with bank identification, etc. Yes, in many it's a good thing. I think the thing that is interesting with cards is that in the end of the day, Visa and MasterCard have built themselves into a position where they act more or less as a central bank. I know some bankers will freak out, but what they have is a set of rules and regulations. So you can go from Finland to US or Brazil, pay with your credit card or debit card, whether it be consumer or corporate, get the goods and get it settled, and you don't have to think about it. Or I can through e-com order something, pay it with my card that is maybe provisioned to Apple Pay or Click to Pay, and then I don't get it. I don't get the goods. I do a dispute. I do a chargeback. So the rules and regulations of the games are set. If you take that concept of setting that rule set globally, good luck with that. Like we can see Europe, like in Europe, we have multiple nationalities and supervisory authorities who look at the rules and regulations a little bit differently. And then the banks try to look at it from their own perspective. So I think there's a place for everything. We have this tendency to hype up stuff every now and then because I blame the VCs. Otherwise, there wouldn't be anything cool to support. And then sometimes something goes horribly to shit, like then with Silicon Valley Bank or stuff like that. So I think all in all, there is a place for different kind of payments in different use cases, especially in the card side. We can see the B2B growing. And I think it was Form 3's CEO or chair. He said that 1 out of 9 transactions are account to account. And I said because I came on stage after him, I said like, cool. So you focus on the 1 out of 9 and I do 8 out of 9.
Yeah, that's great. Way to make use of that comment real time in a speaking session too. I do think you make a good point, and I'm a huge believer in the card networks and just what they've built being so sometimes undervalued, underappreciated in these types of conversations, because often people focus on, I think, the pure movement of the funds or the transaction itself, and miss so much of the other stuff that happens around it that is actually a lot of the value in the network. And we spend a lot of time working on real-time payments and other things around the world. And so many of those systems are so early with a lot of these things that there's probably a decade of building stuff to get it anywhere close. And the thing I hadn't considered before, but you make a good point around, is the jurisdiction aspect. The fact that, it's one thing to have a set of rules for these systems in country that they operate in, but then as you start looking at cross-border, somehow getting alignment on a set of rules around chargebacks and other things it's unfathomable almost that we would get to that. So, I continue to believe that the card networks have positioned themselves as pretty critical to facilitation of money movement around the world. And so I'm right there with you in terms of the importance of that. I guess when we talk about the industries where we've seen the most evolution in use cases, healthcare, travel and hospitality, those come to mind just because of the creation of virtual cards and some of the real-time aspects of that I've seen, and that certainly
Yes.
even as a consumer have experienced. Where else do you see use cases emerging, new use cases for virtual cards or other card uses in the B2B space?
Well, what we can really see is, I call it mobility, but it's a very broad spectrum. It has to do with fleets. So when people and goods need to move, money will need to be involved. Or when people are buying stuff, that's where we see. So in the mobility space, we see fleets growing. So there's a variety of fleets. We see fuel companies transitioning into EV. There we can see it. We see employee benefits, adding loyalty, food, merchants, electric scooters, whatnots. We see mobility in general, transportation, like mobility as a service, and of course, expense management, like where do you buy? So again, looking at the Green Deal, companies need to go towards net zero. ESG reporting is starting to become stricter. Soon there will be fines connected to not comply, or if you are pushing out ESG reports and you're actually not truthful, you can get very big fines, which means that how do you collect the data? Well, the data is in where you spend. So, for example, what we do as ourselves is we have done for multiple years our own ESG report, where we also focus on the scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emission, understanding what we do and how it, whether it be like CO2 emission, etc. So we can see use cases evolving because of a lot of regulation coming up to play that is actually there to make life better for the many people. And as such, expense management, split fuel, EV transition, expense management. And then also you come to the governmental disbursement. Unfortunately, refugee crisis will not go down, because as the climate crisis becomes bigger, refugee crisis, like refugees will unfortunately continue to grow, maybe not just only for war, but just for climate. We can see that, so the next decade or so, it will be increased to certain parts of the world. And also in general, electricity, EV charging or charging as a whole, trying to get away from fossil, are use cases where we can see B2B transactions and card transactions being relevant to have a smooth, let's say, embedded kind of a journey where the payment just works. Like IoT, the car itself becomes a virtual card. Or like instead of thinking about plastic cards or virtual cards or tokenized cards, many different objects can become their own way of paying. So, for example, a car can pay its own parking and charging, etc. But in the end, you always need to have an account. Somewhere needs to reside an account that holds a balance. The balance is either plus or it's minus, and it's minus because you are issued a credit line. It is a simple. Someone needs to hold the ledger, and in order to connect to that ledger, to use that money, whether it be buy now, pay later, or whatever format, you will still need and have massive use of the card rails, because I always say that card rails, like Visa and MasterCard, they are the motorway. They are not the end destination, but they are the motorway, and they are the governing body of saying, like, these kind of vehicles can run here, and this is the data you need to provide when you run here, and this is what it costs to drive here. So I think there's a lot of interesting stuff coming up, and I'm also happy to see a lot of good stuff coming up, trying to make life easier for the many people.
Yeah, I think there's 2 points that I take away there. The first is the idea, or the need to expand the idea around virtual cards, such that just from a language standpoint, right, that there will be all kinds of it's even hard to think of what to call it, objects, things, containers, yes, of a payment, yes, credential, right? And so the virtual card may be kind of the account mechanism, but fundamentally all these objects become containers of cards and credentials that are used to facilitate payment. And I think that's an important kind of thing to think about. I think the other is just in the transparency from a governance standpoint. And I mean, you talked about it in the context of some of the ESG stuff, but just more broadly, the ability to monitor, track, report, show the results of transactions when running on the card network. That's already built, right? You don't have to go build that separate. It's already kind of built into the rails in the network and the utilities that are there, versus some of these other payment methods where if you try to build something account to account, or you try to build something leveraged from the real-time rails, those capabilities haven't been built yet in a lot of cases. And in some cases, again, as we talk about cross-border, it's hard to think of even how they would get built. So there's almost like an accelerator there, or a built-in, you can leverage the foundation of what's already been built for some of these things when you incorporate the card as the payment mechanism. I think that's an important takeaway as well. When we think a little bit about the issuing side of things, issuing's clearly evolved a lot over the last 20 years or so. Used to be, the banks were the only issuers of cards, and that was kind of how the financial system was driven, and that whether you're a small business and you're needing to issue, corporate cards for customers or for employees or whatever the case may be, it always kind of started with the bank. We obviously seen a lot of movement in that space, where you have all kind of third parties that now can issue cards, can create APIs to allow you to issue your own cards, et cetera. How do you guys play in that space? Like, how do you think about the issuing side of things, and whether it's in how you leverage those changes to help move things forward, or how you add to that, and what you guys bring to the table to help advance things there?
Yes, I think that's a good question. So when we started, we were born to be an issuer processor. So being the infrastructure and doing that better, faster, and globally scalable, it is still very much in the heart of what we do. But then I realized that banks don't have balls to buy from us, especially in the early days. So I was like, need to pivot here. And then we started like, okay, but who would actually benefit? And our first customer became a big Nordic energy company, because they had fleets and they wanted to transition into electricity and all of that stuff. And then we realized that, but they don't have the license to issue. And you need to have a license to issue. So you need to be a regulated entity in order to become a principal member, in order to, like a driving license to drive on the road. And then we decided that as our customers, the non-banks, their core business is something else. But if we can bring that payment mechanism, or the way to pay into that, we can help them accelerate and build loyalty and earn more money and do good. And then we could, take the stuff that we are born out of, like banking and building banks. So we actually became an issuer ourselves. So we process globally, but in Europe, including UK, we are a licensed entity. So we are actually an issuer ourselves. We don't issue cards as our own brand, but we help different type of customers to issue, which means that players can buy as a turnkey service from us. And when they become big enough, if they see a benefit or they don't have time or whatever, then they can become a licensed entity themselves. But then we will still continue to do the processing, fraud management, etc. So, for example, the Finnish state treasury who issues the relief funds, that's Enfuce as a whole. But then we have use cases, for example, in Sweden, where employee benefits, the whole user experience, all of that business is driven by our customer, but we bring the license and the processing. So helping different kind of use cases actually grow with the help of cards. And that's something that is very different from what it used to be. And I remember in the old days, when I was a banker myself, we used to talk about co-branding. But what co-branding actually meant was that a bank decides to enable big merchants to issue cards that might have a small logo on them for them, but they do everything for it. But that's not what we do. We are actually enabling our customers to really own the customer journey, to own the customer relationship, but we make sure that they are compliant, that whatever they build, we are there to support and help them, because I do believe strongly that that's how we make innovation happen in a very regulated world, aka payments and banking.
And do you guys do the program management as well, or
Yes.
does that depend on the customer?
No, that's a funny thing. I didn't realize program management existed, because that sounds to me really weird. Like, of course, what the fuck, you need to manage your customers. But then I realized that there are companies, or at least used to be companies, who are only that. So what we are today is we are an issuer, or we're a processor at first. Then you can put on, we are a program manager. So we also have other BIN sponsors. So you can be, and then we also are a BIN sponsor ourselves. So we are an issuer and program manager. So whatever you need, let's say that you are currently running on a BIN sponsor, I'm not going to mention any name, that might have had some challenges, but the processor underneath is, let's say, some of our competitors, like we compete and collaborate. So let's say a Marqeta, to give a US flavor. It's okay. We can become the BIN sponsor and the program manager, and you can continue the processing with Marqeta, or vice versa.
Got it. And it feels like that's really the key today is the flexibility,
Yes.
Right? And that what we certainly see is there's so many variations of what the end customer is looking for, that as a company offering the product or the service, if you're just one thing, it's too narrow, right? You got to have the flexibility both in the platform as well as in the way you go to market, to allow customers almost to pick and choose this piece and that piece and that piece, and I'll put it together. Which is certainly a change, right? Certainly a difference over the last 5-10 years. All right. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. So, Monika, I wanted to thank you for your time today. I appreciate you being here and all the insight. I know I certainly learned a lot more about you and Enfuce, and we'll be following you guys to see how things go. I'm very interested in some of the ESG efforts. I had a note in here that I believe, I don't know if the program is called this or if it's just like a personal statement, but there was a statement I read that said everyone should give a damn. But as a actually branded thing. So I thought that was pretty fantastic. And appreciate you sharing some of that as well. But just a big thank you for joining, sharing your insights. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to stay updated to the latest in payments innovation. You can find us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. The links are in the description. And until next time, I'm Scott Harkey. Thank you.